Alright, let's dive straight into this because the situation unfolding right now feels like the kind of Formula One drama that can completely reshape a season before a single car even hits the track. Ferrari have reportedly responded to the growing power unit controversy surrounding Mercedes, and possibly Red Bull as well. And the message coming out of Maranello is very clear. If there's even a hint that something illegal is happening, they're ready to shut it down before the season begins. And that alone tells you how serious this has become. The rumor at the center of all this is explosive. The claim is that Mercedes and potentially Red Bull powertrains have found a Guerrilla trick that could generate around 15 extra horsepower next season in modern Formula One. That's massive. We're not talking about a tiny optimization that only shows up on datasheets. We're talking about something that could translate into tenths of a second per lap and over a full race distance. That's a game changer. That's why this story spread so quickly through the paddock and why Ferrari are watching it like a hawk. What makes this even more fascinating is that many engineers don't believe this is even possible. On paper, the rumor sounds almost too good to be true, especially given how tightly regulated these power units are. But Ferrari's position seems to be very simple. If Mercedes really are doing something that bends or breaks the rules, Ferrari are prepared to push the FIA to intervene before the lights go out at the season opener in Melbourne. And that's a huge threat, because if an engine were declared illegal that late, there would be no realistic way to redesign it in time. This is where the tension really ramps up. Ferrari aren't just protecting their own competitiveness. They're also protecting the integrity of the championship, at least from their point of view. Because if one manufacturer starts the season with a hidden advantage like that, the damage could already be done before anyone has a chance to react. And Ferrari know that if they're already behind on engine performance, no amount of aerodynamic brilliance is going to save them. Now, I'm genuinely curious what you think here. Do you believe this kind of power gain is actually possible under the current rules, or does this feel like paddock paranoia spiraling out of control? Let me know in the comments, because this debate is just getting started. And if you enjoy staying on top of F1 stories like this as they develop, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. We're pushing toward 2,000 subscribers, and your support really does make a difference. Because next, we need to talk about why a 15 horsepower advantage wouldn't just be nice to have, but potentially devastating for Ferrari if this rumor turns out to be true. To really understand why Ferrari are reacting so strongly, you have to zoom out and look at what a 15 horsepower advantage actually means in today's Formula One. This isn't the early 2000s where engines varied wildly from team to team. The field is incredibly tight, and even a small gain can separate a race winner from someone stuck in traffic. So when people start talking about 15 horsepower, alarm bells go off immediately, especially for a team like Ferrari that already knows how painful it is to be just a step behind. Roughly speaking, that kind of power gain could be worth around 0.3 of a second per lap, depending on the circuit stretch. That over a full Grand Prix distance, and you're suddenly talking about a gap that can reach well over 15 seconds. That's not something you overcome with clever strategy or a slightly better setup. That's the difference between fighting for wins and managing damage limitation every single weekend. For Ferrari, that scenario would be a nightmare, because it would mean starting the season already on the back foot, hoping others trip up rather than controlling their own destiny. And this is where Ferrari's recent decisions come back into focus. They made the call to stop development on their current car very early, sacrificing short-term performance to focus resources on the future. On paper, that sounds smart. In reality, it came with a heavy psychological cost. The car went backwards. Frustration built up inside the team, and both drivers felt it. Even Lewis Hamilton openly acknowledged that the plan was to take the pain now in exchange for a stronger package later. But that gamble only works if the playing field is level. If Mercedes really do have an engine advantage of this scale, then Ferrari's sacrifice suddenly looks a lot riskier. You can optimize the chassis, improve the aero, and refine operations. But if you're starting every race with a power deficit like that, you're constantly in recovery mode. That's why Ferrari simply cannot afford to ignore these rumors, even if part of them suspects the story might be exaggerated. So let me throw this to you. Do you think Ferrari made the right call stopping development early? Yes or no? And more importantly, what matters more next season, in your view, raw engine power or overall car balance? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I really want to see where you stand on this. And if you're enjoying this deeper breakdown instead of just headlines, make sure you subscribe and help us push toward 2,000 subscribers. Up next, we need to dig into the rules themselves, because the real controversy isn't just about horsepower, it's about how the FIA actually defines legality in the first place. This is where the story really starts to get complicated, because once you dig into the rules, you realize why this debate hasn't been shut down already. At the center of everything is the compression ratio regulation for the power units. For the upcoming season, the maximum allowed compression ratio is set at 16:1. In previous years, teams were allowed to run closer to 18:1, which is part of why this topic keeps resurfacing. More compression generally means more power, but it also brings serious risks. Here's the key detail that's causing all the arguments. The FIA tests these engines at ambient temperature. In simple terms, that means when the engine is cold and not running in real race conditions. According to the FIA, if the compression ratio measures at 16:1 during those tests, the engine is considered compliant. Mercedes, if they were defending themselves, would point directly to that and say they are following the procedure exactly as written. But then there's another part of the regulations that muddies the waters. There is language stating that the car must comply with the technical rules at all times during a competition. And that's the line Ferrari are reportedly focusing on. Their argument is straightforward. If the compression ratio increases beyond the limit when the engine is hot and running on track, then the car is no longer legal, regardless of how it behaves in a cold test. That's the gray area. And it's a big one. The rumor suggests that when the engine heats up, thermal expansion could allow certain components to change shape just enough to increase compression beyond the legal limit. On paper, that sounds clever. In reality, it opens up a massive can of worms, because how do you police something that can't easily be measured while the engine is operating? And if the FIA only tests at ambient temperatures, are they effectively leaving a loophole open? This is why some fans are convinced the FIA is quietly siding with Mercedes, while others think the governing body is simply sticking to the only practical testing method available. The FIA have already added extra wording and procedures in response to these discussions, which alone tells you they know this is a potential flashpoint. They're trying to close off any ambiguity before it turns into a full-blown protest war. So I want your take on this. Should the rules apply strictly based on how the engine is tested, or should teams be required to stay within limits at all times, no matter how hard that is to verify? Let me know in the comments. And if this kind of technical deep dive helps you make sense of the chaos, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We're closing in on 2,000 subscribers, and your support keeps these breakdowns coming. Because next, we need to ask the most uncomfortable question of all. Is this rumored trick even physically possible, or is the paddock chasing a story that doesn't really exist? This is the point where a lot of engineers start shaking their heads, because when you move away from theory and into reality, the rumored numbers become incredibly hard to believe. The idea that a team could effectively jump from a 16:1 compression ratio to something close to 18:1 purely through thermal expansion sounds impressive, but it also sounds borderline unrealistic. And that's not coming from fans or journalists. That's coming from people who actually design these engines. The core problem is control. Thermal expansion doesn't happen neatly or evenly. Different materials expand at different rates, and in a Formula One power unit, everything is operating under extreme heat and stress. Trying to engineer a precise, repeatable increase in compression through that process would be incredibly risky. You're talking about reliability issues, lubrication challenges, and a real danger of engine knock or premature ignition. One small miscalculation and the engine doesn't just lose performance, it destroys itself. There's also history to consider. When Honda previously pushed toward higher compression ratios, it took multiple engine redesigns to make it work. That wasn't something achieved through a clever tweak or a hidden trick. It required fundamental architectural changes, and even then, it came with trade-offs. Now add in the modern cost cap, stricter homologation rules, and new fuel requirements, and the challenge becomes even greater. These engines are not as flexible as they once were. That's why many engineers believe that if any increase is happening at all, it's likely very small. Maybe the compression creeps up slightly when the engine is hot, something like 16:1 or 16:2:1, and that's probably happening to every manufacturer to some degree, not just Mercedes. A jump all the way to 18:1 would require such extreme measures that it would almost certainly show up in reliability data or raise red flags long before now, so this leads to an uncomfortable conclusion. Either the rumor has been exaggerated far beyond reality, or there's something else going on that hasn't been fully understood yet. A completely different mechanism, not just thermal expansion, would be required to make these claims believable. And while it's never smart to underestimate top-level F1 engineers, it's also important not to confuse clever optimization with impossible magic. What do you think this is really about? Is this genuine innovation that others failed to spot, or is it mostly noise amplified by fear and competition? Drop your opinion in the comments. And if you want to stay ahead of stories like this as they evolve, subscribe to the channel and help us reach 2,000 subscribers. Because in the final part, we need to look at timing, politics, and what actually happens next, including protests, FIA meetings, and why a dramatic outcome is still very unlikely. When you look at where everything stands, right now, the timing of this whole controversy might be the most important detail of all. These power units have already been homologated. That means, in theory, they've been approved by the FIA and locked in under the current rules. Changing anything significant at this stage isn't just difficult, it's potentially impossible without huge consequences. And that's why the idea of Mercedes or any of their customer teams turning up to the first race without a legal engine feels extremely unrealistic. If Ferrari were to formally protest and the FIA somehow ruled that a power unit was non-compliant, the fallout would be enormous. Mercedes wouldn't just be affected. McLaren, Williams, and any other customer team would be caught in the middle. Under the cost cap and homologation rules, there's no quick fix. You can't simply redesign a crankshaft or rework the engine architecture a few weeks before the season starts. That kind of scenario would be a disaster for the championship, and the FIA knows it. That's why many people believe this situation is as much about pressure as it is about legality. By making it clear that they're willing to protest, Ferrari put the spotlight firmly on Mercedes and the FIA. Every detail gets scrutinized. Every interpretation of the rules gets debated. Even if nothing illegal is ultimately found, the message is sent. Ferrari are watching closely, and they're not afraid to escalate if they feel something isn't right. There's also the political side of this. Reports suggest that this story may have surfaced because someone recently changed teams and shared information internally. That kind of thing happens more often than fans realize, but the timing here is critical. With meetings between the FIA and engine manufacturers coming up, this becomes less about rumors and more about formal discussions behind closed doors. Those conversations will likely determine whether this story fades away quietly or turns into something much bigger. In the end, the most likely outcome is also the least dramatic. The FIA may clarify procedures, tighten wording, and ensure that whatever is happening falls within an acceptable interpretation of the rules. Ferrari get their warning across, Mercedes continue as planned, and the season starts with everyone legally on the grid. But even if that's how it ends, the tension won't disappear, because once trust is questioned in Formula One, it doesn't come back easily. So let me ask you one last thing. Should Ferrari actually push this all the way and force a formal protest, or is that a move that could backfire politically? Let me know in the comments. And if you made it this far, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel to help us reach 2,000 subscribers. This story isn't over, and we'll be following every twist as it develops.